Welcome to Social Problems. This is Chapter 1, Studying Social Problems. Some of the things we're going to be discussing in this chapter is we're going to first talk about some common sociological terms. That's going to allow us to kind of move through the rest of the course whenever I use these terms in other chapters. From there, we will discuss what is the sociological imagination. We're also going to take a look at what's called the sociological perspective. From there, we're going to talk about some dominant sociological theories. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at some common ways that sociologists conduct research. Sociology is a social science. It is the study of social life, social groups, and social institutions. Anything that touches our lives as humans, sociology wants to understand further. The status is a social position that a person holds. For example, being a college student, a mother, an instructor, an artist. Some statuses you were born with, such as your sex or race or nationality. Other statuses you earn, for example, being a professional guitarist. The roles are expectations of behavior associated with the status. So these are going to be those expectations. So for example, mother. Mother is a status. The roles of a mother are to be loving, nurturing, and to provide for their children. A soldier is a status. The roles of a soldier or an expectation is to be honorable, to be courageous, and to protect their country. Norms. These are expectations of behavior in social situations. How we are expected to act in various social settings. The expectations how we're supposed to act in church versus school versus at a party. Norms are taught to us. They are socialized through society. We learn the norms of society. We learn the norms of the family whenever we're being raised. And this allows us to kind of move and navigate through society in appropriate ways. If you violate a norm, that's called deviance. If you go outside of what is expected of you, possibly doing something that may be rude or socially inappropriate, all the way to the furthest extreme of violating a law. When it comes to deviance, there are typically punishments involved. It could be a scolding, it could be a reprimand, it could be a ticket, it could be incarceration. Society. These are groups of people who live in a particular geographical area. So here in Central Arkansas, the people who make up this area, they are the society. And what they share is a culture. So culture is the technology, the laws, the norms, the fashion, the political beliefs, the religious beliefs that are shared by those people in society. So society are the people living in the geographical area and what they share amongst one another, their food, their fashion, their religion, their educational systems, is going to be their culture. Social movements. These are groups of people who come together to promote a cause of equality, to move or shape society, to bring about more equality. And throughout this course, we're going to be talking about various social movements like the abolitionist movement and the women's movement and the civil rights movement. The sociological imagination is a very important concept, and it essentially says that our perception of the world around us is heavily shaped by our experiences in life. The time period that we're born, the family that we're born into, the positive childhood experiences, the negative childhood experiences, all can kind of create a perception of how we look at the world. And because everybody has different experiences, everybody has different perceptions. They see the world differently. And it doesn't necessarily mean that one perception is right or wrong. It's just that it's different. And so if we're going to understand sociology and try to study society, it's going to be important to understand that the way that we look at the world or you look at the world doesn't mean that everybody else looks through that same lens. We all see things differently. So it encourages us to really kind of look openly, broadly, and open-mindedly. And that leads us into a sociological perspective. This is the attempt to question what may be obvious in front of us in society and try to look at the world objectively, open-mindedly, unbiasedly, and critically. This is something that we are called to do if we're going to be studying society, to try to look at different cultures, different ways of life, things that may seem a little bit unusual to us, different from us from an American perspective, but to try to look at it not so much from a narrow lens or a narrow point of view, but to look at it openly, objectively, and to ask questions. Well, why do you do the things that you do? Why do you believe this? And that's going to be the critical side of it, where you're asking questions to try to understand the world around us. Let's take a look at some of the main dominant sociological theories. And these theories are quite common in any sociology course that you take. The first theory is structural functionalism. This is a macro level theory. And what that means is that it looks at things on a societal level, on a large scale, on a national scale, or a global scale. Structural functionalism, through this lens of the way that we look through the world, at the world, we're looking at systems in society and how they work. We look at various types of social systems like our educational system, our healthcare system, our political system, our educational system, all these various social systems that are put in place to provide some sort of service and to keep society moving and running like a well-oiled machine. So the perspective here is it looks at not only these systems, but various policies and programs that we use here in society. And it asks the question, is it functional? Is it working properly? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? Whether we're talking about food stamps or Social Security or various political policies, various laws and regulations, our educational system, are they running like a well-oiled machine? Are they functional or healthy? If the idea is that it's dysfunctional, it's broken, it's not working as efficiently as it should, then maybe we should tweak it, change it, or maybe even get rid of it. We've seen our educational system go through a lot of curriculum changes over the years. Everything from No Child Left Behind to Common Core. We've made systematic changes with Social Security, increasing the age of eligibility. Even here at the college, policies have to be changed every now and then. So when it comes to structural functionalism, it looks at society on a grand scale, and it tries to analyze, is our society running smoothly? And if not, what changes can be made to make it go from a dysfunctional policy or program to one that is functional and healthy? This is about homeostasis. This is about balance. Conflict theory is quite different. This is also a macro level theory. It looks at what's happening on a large scale with a lot of people on a national or global scale. Conflict theory is the opposite of structural functionalism. So through this lens of how you're looking at society, what you're more concerned about is social injustice, inequality. It analyzes which groups in society are being marginalized, they're being treated differently, that they don't have the same rights and opportunities and privileges that other groups may have. It takes a look at marginalized groups that may be treated differently based on their race, their ethnicity, their sex, their nationality, their sexual orientation. And it analyzes these groups and not only how are they being treated, but also are they experiencing class consciousness, which is, are they aware they're being marginalized? And if so, are they coming together to push back against society and creating social movements for change? This theory was heavily influenced by Karl Marx. And Karl Marx was an economist and also a political theorist. And he wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto. And in this, he talked about the social conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, and the proletariat, the labor force. And he felt that there was a level of abuse and injustice between them, where the bourgeoisie were oppressing the proletariat in order to make them rich. So these concepts within this book and some of his ideas have contributed to the discipline of sociology. So if they do create this class consciousness, what we have seen here in America throughout American history is the creation of social movements like the abolitionist movement, where their main objective was to end slavery. The women's movement, to bring about more opportunities for women, such as the right to vote, the right to be admitted into colleges, to have equal pay in employment, to not be discriminated against in employment settings based on their sex. And we also have the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement main objective was to end segregation in society, to allow blacks and whites to go to school together, to work around each other, to live around each other, to sit next to each other in restaurants and on buses, to allow interracial marriage. The next theory we have is called symbolic interactionism. This is the predominant micro-level theory in sociology. This studies how symbols, language, and body language is used to convey meaning in society. So this is very much on a micro level. So earlier we talked about the sociological imagination, how our personal experiences shape our perception around us. It not only shapes our perception of the world around us, but also how we feel about ourselves, how we perceive other people, and also how we interact with other people based on those feelings and based on those perceptions. That's why they call it symbolic interactionism, because there's a level of interaction here. So symbolic interactionism takes a look at the various symbols that we use in society and how they convey meaning. So like a wedding ring that you wear. The wedding ring is a symbol of being married. But to you, it may not be a very expensive wedding ring, but it's something that's very, very important to you. It's invaluable. To somebody else, they may see your wedding ring and not really think much of it. So it's also how the symbols convey meaning to us. But symbols can actually change. If you take a look at these two photographs here, there in the middle, this is Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, and he's holding up the symbol with his hand. And at this time, it stood for V for victory, for winning World War II. So you move from the 40s to the 1960s through the hippie movement. And now you see the sign here with John Lennon with the Beatles and his wife. And so now this symbol, from what we understand and how we understand it, conveys peace. So what this means is that the symbols we have in society, they can evolve and they can change. So the important thing about symbolic interactionism is to understand that people have different experiences, they have different traumas in their lives, and it can affect the way they feel about themselves and how they interact with other people. And the reason this is so important is because this allows us to help people. If we start to notice that they are struggling, they're having some difficulties, we can analyze their experiences through counseling. And maybe we can give them the tools to heal and to move forward. The next theory is referred to as feminist theory. This works on both a macro and micro level, on a large scale and a smaller scale. So the main thing that this theory looks at, it looks at the dynamics, the power dynamics between men and women. It analyzes things like sexism, discrimination based on one's sex. It analyzes patriarchy, male-dominated societies. And within those societies, are these women, how they may experience more prejudice or discrimination, not have as many rights and opportunities to education, to employment, to certain levels of power and authority within their own family. It takes a look at gender roles in society, how society shapes one's perception of what are masculine traits and feminine traits. It takes a look at the issue of sexual assault, which is something that is more likely experienced by women than men, gender stereotypes. So feminist theory is somewhat like conflict theory, where it looks at marginalized groups, but it's more specific. It looks at the power dynamics between men and women within the home, within the workplace, within the culture, within the religion, on all different types of levels. It also takes a look at women's movements and how women's movements are created to try to bring about more equality, and oftentimes to move away from patriarchy to move into egalitarianism, where there's gender equality. There's some parts of the world today that they are creating their women's movements right now. And the women are coming together and they're talking about the right to an education, the right to vote, the right to not be physically abused by their husbands. Here in the United States, we started our women's movement a long time ago, back in the 1840s, a couple of decades prior to the Civil War. The photograph you see here is Susan B. Anthony. She was a suffragist. So she was at the forefront of the women's movement, and she started what's known as the Women's Suffrage Association in 1869. The Women's Suffrage Association, its main objective was to push forward and try to give women the right to vote. But that did not occur until 1920, which is known as women's suffrage. So whenever women's suffrage passed in 1920, this gave women the right to vote on a national scale. So we give a lot of credit to Susan B. Anthony for women's right to vote. They were talking about this in the 1860s, but it didn't occur until a little over half a century later. So what this tells you is that sometimes the wheels of equality move very slowly. And sometimes even generations have to die out before new generations with new perspectives and new ideas come forward to kind of push legislation through. Another success of the women's movement is called Title IX of Education Amendments Act, 1972. And what this act did, it brought about gender equality in sports, in the K through 12, the college, and the university level. So this brought about more equality and more funding for women's sports within education. So prior to 1972, the majority of sports found in K through 12, college and university, a lot of the funding went more so towards the boys, the male athletes. But because of this brought about more funding, more spotlight, and more policies to prevent discrimination, to allow young girls, teenagers, and women to be involved in sports within our educational system. And lastly, we'll take a look at sociological research. Since sociology is a social science, it is required to use the scientific method to create hypotheses, to test those hypotheses, to gather data, to analyze data, and to try to create sound theories to move sociology forward. The main reason that sociology was created in the 1800s was because of the Industrial Revolution. In the Industrial Revolution, which occurred in Europe and here in the United States, it brought a lot of progress, indeed, but it also brought about a lot of problems. Immigration issues, poverty issues, issues of crime, issues of child labor. It created a lot of problems that we were growing so fast as a society that the systems were not in place to deal with a lot of these issues. So sociology was actually created to solve these social problems that came out of the Industrial Revolution. And so for sociology to be respected as a discipline, it must use the scientific method. So there are three primary ways that sociologists, whenever they have developed their hypothesis, will choose to gather and analyze data and to test their hypothesis. The first one is called secondary analysis. This is research data that has been conducted and gathered by other people, but it's readily available. A lot of sociologists will go to the US Census, which deals with demographic or population information. The US Census comes out every 10 years, and it brings a wealth of information that sociology can kind of analyze what's happening with our population within the household, gives a wealth of information. And the main reason that sociologists look at the US Census is because it kind of shows demographic trends, where things are moving in society. Another example would be the Uniform Crime Report. The Uniform Crime Report is an annual report that the FBI puts out each year. Local, state law enforcement, they send all of their reported crimes to the FBI each year. And the FBI collectively puts this together in a massive report. And what it shows is a comparison of violent crimes versus property crimes around the country. It allows sociologists and criminologists, it kind of shows us where crimes are occurring, what types of crimes are occurring, and also are various crimes, are the trends moving up or are they moving down? They can be analyzed state to state and also county to county and city to city. A third example of secondary analysis used by sociologists are called vital statistics. Vital statistics, this is public information. You can typically go down to the courthouse. We have the Freedom of Information Act, which allows us to have access to a lot of information. So some examples of vital statistics would be birth records, marriage records, divorce records, death records. So all of this can be statistical data that is kind of brought in if you are testing your hypothesis. The primary type of method that sociologists use to study or to analyze their particular hypothesis, which their hypothesis by definition is your prediction of a social phenomenon or an event. It's your educated guess. It's actually what you're going to be testing. It's written out in a testable form. So surveys are actually the most common. It could be a written survey, it could be an online survey. And the reason that surveys are the most common is because you can send it out to a lot of people, whoever your target audience is, whoever your population is, whoever you want to send the survey to, and you can get the information or you can get the answers relatively quickly. They can mail it back to you, or it could be an online survey. So this is a quick, efficient, and oftentimes an inexpensive way to gather an incredible amount of information. But that doesn't mean it's the best way. Just because it's the quickest and most efficient doesn't mean it's the best way. because you may find for your particular hypothesis and what you're questioning that you may need to use observational research to observe other people. So there are some fallacies when it comes to surveys you got to be careful of. So if you're writing out a survey and you're asking questions to a particular target audience, let's say that your target audience are going to be community college students that are non-traditional students that are 25 and older. That's your target audience. Well, you have to be very mindful and careful of the way that you're asking these questions, because people can interpret the questions in different types of ways. Your sample is going to be a smaller representative of your target audience. Sometimes you may not be able to send your survey to the entire population. And so it's important that your sample size be as large as possible so it can have a better representation of the population. And it's also good if your sample is also randomly selected, which gives everybody in the population an equal and fair chance of getting chosen for that survey. And this is typically done through various types of computer software that can randomly select a certain percentage of the population to send to. In other types of sociological research, you may feel that it's best to use what's known as observational research. And this is where you are observing people and you're analyzing that data. So where surveys can be very, very quick and you can get the information very quickly, come back to you, but you may decide, you know what, when it comes to my hypothesis of what I'm trying to understand, then I need to use more observational research. And this can be very expensive and it can actually take a long time. There's some observational research that take years, if not decades, because they're kind of tracking people throughout the course of their lives. So there are different types of observational research. One is called a laboratory observation. This is in kind of a very controlled environment. So if you wanted to see the play habits of toddlers, of small children, of little boys and little girls within a room, are they playing with each other? Are they segregating off, or boys are playing with boys and girls are playing with girls? What toys are they playing with? So to the child, they're just having a play date. But they may not really realize that their behavior is being observed and being analyzed. Field observation is somewhat like people watching. So field observation or watching people within their natural environment. So if you're watching the behaviors of parents interacting with their children, say at a city park, are they interacting with their children? Are they playing with them? Are they're playing on their phone? What are they doing? You're just kind of people watching and making that observation. Lastly, we have is called participant observation, which is also known as ethnography. And this is going to be where the sociologist becomes part of the study themselves. Sometimes sociologists will go actually undercover. They will infiltrate a particular group of people, whether it is gang activity, which can be very dangerous, whether it's various hate groups, whether it's a nudist colony, whether it's a homeless community. They may actually go undercover to go inside to be welcomed into this group to get some inside information. They're kind of welcomed into it. They kind of become a subject themselves. The one thing that all three of these different types of observations need to be mindful of and careful of are called, whether it's laboratory observations, field observations, and participant observations, is called the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect occurs whenever subjects start to realize that they're being watched and their behavior starts to change. So once subjects start to realize that they're being watched and their behavior starts to change, that data that you're analyzing, it may not be useful anymore, because usually people's behavior starts to change for the better whenever they're actually being watched. So what you're viewing and what you're watching may not be very authentic. So if you're doing observation of people, you want it to be as natural as possible. Like I said, whether you are watching people in a laboratory or field observation, or you're going actually undercover, you want to try to avoid this Hawthorne effect. So our final thoughts for chapter 1. Sociology and sociologists utilize sociological research, and they use various macro and micro theories discussed in this chapter to help better understand and study social problems in society.